Custody questions are among the most complex and delicate issues in civil law. Sometimes the parents' views on life differ so greatly that they have to turn to a judge. But even then, it is not always possible to find a solution that satisfies everyone involved. In such situations, some even turn to crime. Biannca Edmunds' parents were Ross and Elon. The girl was the second oldest of 4 children in the family, with 2 brothers and 1 sister. When she was young, her father took a job at a mining company, so he was often away on long business trips. This caused a rift in her parents' relationship. Her mother wanted her husband to spend more time with her and the children, but he couldn't refuse this lucrative position. Eventually, the couple separated. After a while, Biannca's mother remarried a man named Edmunds, who also had children from a previous marriage. Because of this, Biannca was often referred to by his last name, Edmunds, though neither the family nor Biannca herself minded, since she had hardly any connection to her biological father in her younger years. However, once she was older and about to graduate from school, she reconnected with him and they developed a close bond. After finishing secondary school, Biannca joined the Australian Navy, but sustained a back injury during a training exercise a year later. She was discharged for medical reasons. After her recovery, she hopped from one job to another, mostly in retail to stay in one place for long. In 2007, she had her first son, named Tyler. He was born after she began a relationship with a man called Dirk, but Dirk had no interest in family life or children, so the couple separated. He showed no concern for his son's life, and the child spent most of his time with his mother and her relatives. By this point, Biannca had become a mature woman who knew what she wanted, dreaming of reliable support and a comfortable life. In early 2012, at the age of 26, she met Michael Capiciana. He was already 35 by then, and his financial standing matched Biannca's ambitions perfectly. She acted quickly. The relationship progressed, and they married the same year they met. At the end of 2012, Biannca became pregnant again, and on the 3rd of June, 2013, she gave birth to a son she named Luca. Despite this fast development, the relationship was toxic from the start. Michael repeatedly complained that his wife tried to control everything, which felt very limiting to him. They argued constantly and, soon after the baby's birth, decided to end the marriage. In early 2015, Biannca met 48-year-old Glenn Cassidy via the Tinder dating app. As usual, she acted quickly and rashly. She realized that her new acquaintance was very soft in nature, which suited her because she wanted to be in charge of the relationship. An online flirt quickly led to an in-person meeting and intimacy, even though the man was 20 years older than she was. Before he met his young partner, Glenn had been married for 20 years and had 2 children from that marriage. It seemed these parallel details in their lives might help them build a rapport and understand each other better. True to her usual decisive style, Biannca and Glenn married just a few months later, in February 2016. Meanwhile, she was dealing with multiple contentious matters in her personal life, especially the custody dispute with her former husband. In the first months of Luca's life, Michael played only a small role and often refused to meet him. But starting in February 2013, things changed. At that time, Michael began a relationship with another woman, found financial stability, and decided to spend more time with his child, who was then barely a few months old. From March 2014 onward, Luca's biological father asked to see his son, but Biannca wouldn't let him into her life. This led to numerous conflicts in which Biannca leveled all kinds of accusations against her ex, calling him toxic and unfit to be a father. Michael was not deterred, convinced her claims were baseless, so he filed a lawsuit. In August 2015, after several hearings, the court granted Michael the right to see his child, but with strict limitations. He could visit his son in a neutral, supervised setting every 2 weeks for short, 2-hour meetings. These meetings took place in Melbourne, which was 2 hours by car from Shepparton, where Michael lived. Of course, All of this also inconvenienced Biannca greatly. In general, she disliked the idea that this toxic ex would still have any role in her son's life. She wanted to end the connection, but couldn't find a way. To her great frustration, the situation did not improve. Her ex-husband grew more attached to the child and decided to file another petition with the court, now wanting to increase both the length and frequency of his visits with Luca and to do so without supervision. That triggered a new wave of Biannca's outrage and led to numerous fights, some even physical, with each side blaming the other. Michael's and Biannca's partners described completely opposite scenarios. Michael's girlfriend, Savannah, called Biannca a toxic person trying to limit a loving father's contact with his son. According to her, Michael had reevaluated his stance and wanted to connect with his son, and the law was on his side. She described him as a devoted family man with a good heart. Meanwhile, Glenn, who was with Biannca, portrayed his partner's ex as so toxic and cruel that he posed a threat to his own son. Biannca repeatedly told him how Luca's biological father had threatened to kidnap the child and even take him abroad. Over the years she was with Glenn, Biannca talked more and more about getting rid of Michael. First, she turned Glenn against him by saying what a bad father Michael was, but that didn't work as she had hoped. Then she started manipulating Glenn, using physical intimacy as her main weapon. In December 2015, she provoked tensions in the family by refusing to have sex with her husband unless he agreed that her ex needed to die. Even during intimacy, he had to reaffirm that he would commit the crime, but he refused. Then the situation escalated to a new level. A simple relationship with his wife turned into pure pressure, and she called him a coward for failing to solve her problem with the ex and help her. Initially, Glenn tried to brush it off, but it only got worse, and he gradually began to take the idea of killing Michael more seriously, feeling constant pressure. He even took the initiative after his wife suggested making a plan for retaliation. Glenn produced a handwritten, rather superficial list covering the main points. He intended to kill his archenemy with a single gunshot, then go to the victim's house, find a way to transport the body, and hide it. Some lines were nonsensical, such as Morgenstrasse, clearly containing spelling and phrasing errors. Indeed, Glenn's note was riddled with mistakes, suggesting he had obvious literacy problems that later played a significant role. Biannca had a strong bargaining chip to convince her husband to proceed with the crime. Glenn desperately wanted a child with her. Her sexual blackmail worked perfectly. The couple had been having issues conceiving and openly discussed it. They even attempted IVF. Through skillful manipulation, Biannca managed to convince Glenn that once Michael was dead, they would definitely have a child together. After drafting this plan on paper, the criminals started preparing and carrying it out bit by bit. They wanted to find the best place to ambush Michael and drew up a map of the neighborhood where their target lived with Savannah. Biannca knew where and how Michael's house was situated, so she created a detailed plan indicating the location of doors and windows. Their preparations were serious enough that they even figured out the positions of streetlights and which neighbors had dogs that might bark and draw attention. By March 2016, their plan was complete. Biannca was eager to have her ex murdered as soon as possible, but each time they set a date, something went wrong, so they kept postponing it. Glenn kept going to Michael's house to see firsthand how to arrive from different streets and how to make a getaway. During these visits, he called Biannca to tell her about various obstacles that could derail their plan, such as Michael coming home too late from work or being out with friends. They communicated in code, referring to the area around Michael's place as their workplace. Glenn stayed up late several times, waiting for the target, while Biannca urged him on, hoping the man would be killed soon. Yet Glenn was visibly nervous and seemed uncertain. Biannca then used her main weapon, sex, promising him that once Michael was gone, he could have it as often as he liked. Later, the police obtained recordings of all these calls. For unknown reasons, Glenn had installed an app on his phone that recorded conversations, possibly sensing he was being manipulated and hoping to protect himself if it all fell apart. Regardless, it didn't lessen his guilt in the shooting that followed. During the crime, Biannca was supposed to be on vacation in Darwin with Glenn's mother, on the other side of Australia likely, to provide her with an alibi that would convince the police of her innocence. On the 11th of March, 2016, she prepared to leave, going over the plan with Glenn in detail beforehand. On the 12th of March, 2016, Glenn drove 170 kilometers to the victim's house. Biannca received a text from him saying he would take care of Michael for his wife and kids. At 12:23 p.m., he sent another message, declaring his love for her and expressing anger toward his intended victim. Biannca, however, started to discourage him around 1 p.m. that day. Glenn then drove up the driveway to Michael's house, reaffirming one last time how much he loved Biannca and was ready to complete the job. At that moment, Michael and Savannah were relaxing at home, enjoying some time together, returning only around 7 p.m. For the entire afternoon, the killer had been lying in wait nearby, with a clear view of the front door. When they got home, the couple sat down to watch a movie. At 7:18 p.m., Savannah went to the window and saw a man step out of a car and walk along the street toward their house with empty hands. She recognized him, felt confused, and told Michael. It seemed strange, since they lived far from Biannca and her new husband, and she had no idea why Glenn would be there. Glenn saw her too, paced back and forth, then got back in his car likely trying to gather his thoughts. At 7:27 p.m., he got out again, this time carrying a large white bag, looked around, and saw no one. At 7:30 p.m., he knocked on Savannah and Michael's door. His appearance on the doorstep that late seemed inexplicable. Worried, Michael went to the kitchen for a large knife and opened the door while leaving the chain on. The men exchanged a few words. Savannah heard Michael say that he couldn't help. Then Glenn stretched out his hand, supposedly to say goodbye, and Michael responded by shaking it, which proved a big mistake. The killer pulled his hand away and kicked the door in, leading to a violent struggle. Glenn tried to get out a shotgun and aimed it at his opponent's head. Michael fought back with his knife, inflicting numerous stab wounds. Everything happened in front of the terrified woman, whose whole life flashed before her eyes. Glenn apparently wanted to finish off the witness too, but he had forgotten there was only one shell loaded, intended to kill his archenemy. The shotgun clicked, but no shot was fired, as there was no round in it. Realizing he couldn't shoot the witness, he struck her in the head with the butt of the gun, causing her to fall unconscious. It's highly likely Glenn also intended to kill her, but he collapsed onto the floor himself from blood loss due to the knife wounds. By 7:32 p.m., it was over. When Savannah came to, she found both men dead. She called emergency services, saying she had been attacked and her fiancé had been killed. She had suffered a mild concussion from the blow with the gun's butt. Because Glenn was weakened by blood loss, he lacked time to inflict more serious harm on her. The police who arrived at the scene found it a bloody and baffling sight. Savannah gave a detailed account of what had happened, but as the only survivor of the chaos, she was initially their prime suspect. The investigators quickly concluded she had nothing to do with the murders. Soon they located Glenn's car parked on the opposite side of the street, which still contained his lunch chicken schnitzel with green peas. A database check confirmed that the vehicle belonged to the attacker. They examined security camera footage, seized the deceased killer's phone, and looked through his text messages. The entire story was murky from the beginning, so it took 3 whole months for investigators to reach Biannca and realize she was the mastermind behind the killing. Clearly, she thought she had gotten away with it. She was shocked when police showed up at her door. The 29-year-old was arrested in December 2016 and taken in for questioning, at which point she became hysterical. She pretended Glenn had planned the whole thing on his own, and she had tried to talk him out of his fatal mistake, but he wouldn't listen and carried out the plan while she was away. Biannca claimed her husband had been upset about Michael's behavior and blamed him for taking his child, saying Glenn felt robbed of time with Luca. Even the boy wasn't biologically his. The widow alleged that her new husband had long wanted a child and held Michael responsible for not being able to have one. However, law enforcement knew this was a lie. The phone logs of the deceased killer contained text messages and even recorded phone calls laying out their plan for murder, which they had been plotting for months. As an alibi, Biannca pointed to the last message Glenn had sent to her phone, the one professing his love and hatred of Michael, which, she claimed, was the first she had heard of the impending attack, and that she couldn't stop him. But the police spotted a discrepancy. In the note Glenn had written outlining the murder, there were many spelling errors. Yet the text message Biannca showed them, allegedly from Glenn, had perfect spelling too neat for someone with poor literacy skills. Police therefore believed Biannca herself had composed and sent the message from her husband's phone, planting evidence. Still, the suspect denied any involvement, insisting she had never known of the murder plot and had never purchased or even known about the shotgun. Moreover, she hadn't physically been at the crime scene. With insufficient evidence linking her to a specific crime, the police released her while continuing their investigation. During that time, Biannca apparently got bored and went back on Tinder to find new men. Barely 3 weeks after Glenn's death, she met Todd Bookham, an ex-con currently on parole, with a lengthy record involving violence. He had spent about a decade in prison for slitting his first wife's throat in front of their young son. Early in their relationship, Biannca told Todd that Glenn had died of cancer. Just a few weeks later, she became pregnant, but then lost the child. By chance, Todd came across information online about Glenn and Michael and confronted Biannca. She confessed to planning the incident, saying Glenn was never supposed to die. She claimed she only wanted Michael out of the way because she feared he might gain custody of their son and she would never see Luca again. After her confession, Biannca grew hysterical, saying she was terrified the police would figure out her role. Todd went straight to the station and disclosed everything she had told him. In April 2018, Biannca was questioned again. Despite Todd's testimony, she continued to deny sending that text from Glenn's phone, insisted she had never seen any drawing of Michael's house, and denied having planned his murder. The officers then told her they had found her fingerprints on the shotgun used in the shooting. At first, she had no explanation for these facts, and also continued to deny that custody was the central motive for the killing. When investigators mentioned Todd's claims, she said she couldn't remember those conversations. She blamed her depression after losing the baby and the effect of antidepressants. Once again, the police decided there wasn't enough evidence to arrest her, and she was released. This went on until June 2019, when investigators finally felt they had enough proof that she had been involved in either instigating or directly participating in the murder of her 38-year-old ex-husband, Michael. However, the pandemic lockdowns caused further delays in the investigation. Hearings to consider Biannca's role in Michael's murder did not begin until June 2022. The prosecution argued that her motive was not wanting to share custody of the child and fearing that Michael might take him away. Investigators suspected she intended for Glenn to end up in prison too, thus ridding herself of that bothersome man as well. She thought Glenn was too old and that he was starting to annoy her. But the killing went awry, and Glenn died in the process of murdering Michael, which also suited her fine. There is strong evidence that by then she was already looking for a new partner and chatting actively with strangers on dating apps, which is how she met Todd. The prosecution maintained she had composed that incriminating text message in Glenn's name to create an alibi, and that her trip to Darwin was also part of the plan. In addition, audio recordings of their phone conversations and written correspondence were meticulously analyzed. To convince the jury, the authorities presented all evidence found, including a map that Biannca had apparently drawn of Michael's house. Her DNA was discovered on it. Moreover, her fingerprints and footprints were on the murder weapon, a direct contradiction of her interrogation claims. The defense insisted the state only had circumstantial evidence and suggested Glenn hated Michael for trying to be involved in Luca's life. Biannca also continued to claim there was never any dispute over custody and that both parties had acted calmly and cooperatively. But multiple witnesses for the prosecution testified that Biannca had wanted her ex out of the picture for some time because of the custody battle. Even her own mother stated in court that her daughter had called the day after the murder and admitted that Glenn was not meant to die and that it was all her fault. Biannca tried to explain the fingerprints on the shotgun by saying they came from a sexual scenario with Glenn, claiming he became aroused when she threatened him with the weapon, an utterly unbelievable tale that did nothing to justify her lies in earlier interrogations. A few weeks after she began seeing Todd, Biannca discovered she was pregnant again. Todd said he would withdraw his statement if she forgave him and took him back, but Biannca believed someone else was the real father. The jury deliberated on the confusing case but could not reach a unanimous verdict in the first trial, leading it to be declared a mistrial. A second hearing in August that same year was also deemed invalid when certain forbidden arguments were raised in court. In December 2022, the case was finally tried again. This time, all the evidence collected during the investigation was presented, including text exchanges between Biannca and Glenn, in which she talked about celebrating today, a clear sign she was rejoicing in the prospect of the murder. Ultimately, the jury concluded that Biannca was complicit in murder. In essence, through the cunning of this cruel woman, two people died at once, one of them a victim of her manipulation. Everyone was shocked at how deeply Glenn had been influenced before his death. Biannca quickly saw that he was easy to manipulate and used his weaknesses as her main weapon. She wanted to kill two birds with one stone. Although Glenn's death was not originally part of the plan, she had apparently hoped to convince him to take full responsibility so he would go to prison while she walked free. Biannca Edmunds was sentenced to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Bianca's children were placed in the care of other family members. Because of their mother's treachery, the children were left without parents. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.